with the impact of congregational singing. You know, there's a lot of different elements of a church service. And sometimes a lot of those are sort of specialized. For instance, when it comes to moderating the service and it comes to preaching, who's responsible for that? It's the preacher. You know, if we lay an egg, it's our own fault, you know. It's because we're it, you know. When you have an offertory or you have a special, you know, you usually have a pianist and you'll have one or two vocalists or maybe a group could get up and sing. And so that's sort of a compartmentalized thing. Even with the offering, with ushers. I remember as a bus kid learning to take the offering at the Turners Creek Baptist Church. I'll never forget, I was an usher for like one of the first times, and there all the ushers, when they started at the front, and then when they started the offering, they went all the way to the back and worked up, at least during that time. And I got so nervous, I was messed up. I was taking the offering in a totally different... It was on me, you know, as an usher. I was scared to death. I didn't know what I was doing. And but you know, you get in different parts of the services. You know, you're like, well, that's that one. Well, let me tell you something. With the congregational singing, every person in this room, you're really the one that controls that. Don't go to blaming the preacher. No. Last time I checked, y'all are the congregation. And so tonight, I want to talk to you here for these next few moments just about the impact of congregational singing. I want to talk to you about why we do it. I want to talk to you about, you know, how we should do it, all that's involved in it, and try to give you some tips as an individual. Now, as we start tonight thinking about this, you know, I want to ask you this question. By the way, my notes are not as detailed as Corey's, all right? So I make you try to fill in the blanks here, but you know, I'm not going to. I love it when you get quotes and all of that like he gave. I'm going to go home and chew on some of that for a while that I heard in the last hour. But now this won't be in your notes per se, but I just want you to think about this. Okay, you don't have to write this down. What do you think in your mind right now about congregational singing? You individually, okay? Now, I'm not talking about the correct answer here. You know, people are like, congregation, that's where we all sing and praise God. No, I want to know what you really think about congregational singing. For instance, some people say, well, I can't sing, so I just don't do it. That happens. I mean, there may be some of you in this room tonight. You're like, I can't sing, so I just don't really do it. Okay, that's fine. All I'm going to say is hear me out. Okay? There are others of you who are like, man, it's a boring part of the service. Man, we get in there and it's just like... There are some people that think that. There's some that are like, well, it's something we've always done, so we just do it. You know, we always have the special right after the offering, and that's, you know, we just done it that way. You know, there may be some of you in here, you get really tore up when Brother Cantrell throws a curve and changes something. You know, we ain't never done that before. But you know, some people, when it comes to congregational singing, they're like, we just always have done it, so I guess that's why we do it. And then some people are like, yeah, we sing the same old songs. It's the same. Now, I'm not for introducing, like I've been in some services where the song leader like introduces a new song every service. And had I been that pastor, I would have taken him in the back at gunpoint and said, listen, I'm not against the new one every now and then, but good night. Nobody since Martin Luther sung that song, and we're pulling it on us. This is like ridiculous, you know. But I will tell you, you do need to, you know, stretch yourself a little bit, you know. And some of you are just like, yeah, we just sing the same old stuff. And so, you know, that's common thinking about what people think about congregational singing. Those are realistic thoughts that maybe some of you in this room have thought, it's okay. I'm not offended at all, okay? But tonight, I want to try to challenge your thinking about congregational singing, because you know what? It can be one of the most dynamic parts of your service. And so let's talk about it tonight a little bit, all right? the first thing I want you to do, boy, that blue there, I'm sorry I put that, that'll burn your retinas out if you try to read the blue part there. The history of congregational singing, that's number one. The history of congregational singing, that's going to be number one in your notes. How long has there been congregational singing? That's the question I want to ask you as we think about this tonight. And we talk about congregational, is this like something some Baptist made up years ago to make us miserable? Is this, is this something that only Gregorian chants and monks did back in these convents? And it's like, I don't know, where did this come from? All right, well, I want you to think with me about the history of congregational singing, okay? Here's some things I want you to think about. The very first thing, letter A in your notes, is it was found in the nation of Israel. You want to talk about how far back this goes? Listen, Exodus 15. When I was at Turner's Creek, I had to learn the books of the Bible in order. As a kid in junior church, as a bus kid. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Listen, you go, by the time you hit the book of Exodus, second book of the Bible, they're already singing. You say, who's singing? Israel's singing. Now I want you to look at this, Exodus 15:1. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for He hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath He thrown into the sea. This is one of the first songs you see in the Bible. No sheet music, no black notes or hymnals. But the entire nation of Israel singing together. I think the ones that were off pitch and the ones that were on pitch and everywhere in between, they're all jumping together and they're all singing. And it's interesting about this song here. You know what's just happened in Exodus 14? Israel has just crossed they crossed the Red Sea. And it was by miraculous fashion. Moses, remember, he says, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. He raises the rod and all of them go across. And once that is done, Moses, and they start singing a song. And it's really interesting about this song. I'm not going to take the time to read it, but later on in Exodus 15, when you read this song, it's got some weird lyrics. You say weird, I shouldn't say weird lyrics, I should just say unusual lyrics. Could you imagine singing in church a song talking about people dying in the sea, drowning to death? That's what they were singing about. You read through there in Exodus 15, they're like, and they died in the sea, God's enemies were killed. I mean, that's like, you're like, boy, that's a little harsh, Now, we don't have time to examine all of that, but I'm just here to tell you, when it comes to congregational singing, it's an ancient practice. It's an old practice. I realize that, sometimes tradition needs a good kick in the teeth. When you just do something because you've always done it that way. I understand that. Sometimes that needs a kick in the teeth. But you need to realize there are some things in the church that are ancient and should always be. And among the people of God, they've always been a singing people. Prove me wrong. So you see that in the history of congregational singing, it was found in the nation of Israel. But not only that, it was also in the early church. You say, well, do you know of any songs that they sang in the early church? Listen, I probably can't give you any title and lyrics, but I think it's awful odd that God would talk about singing in the church in Colossians 3 and Ephesians 5 if they weren't doing it. Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord, Ephesians 5:19, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Those were instructions given to the early church, and 2,000 years later, here you are. You're just a continuation of a long line of people singing in the church. Now, so for some of you here, and you're like, well, I can't carry a tune in a bucket. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Very few people in this world are actually tone deaf. Some people maybe cannot sing the best, but there's some, like I'm tone deaf. Very few people are tone deaf where they can't match a pitch. You may not be some greatest singer in the world, but I don't care. Whatever ability you have when it comes to music, give it your all in congregational singing. I'm afraid a lot of times in the church services we're so disengaged in the congregational singing. And, it just, man, I'm going to tell you, we just ought to be ready to go from the start and just say, all right, we're going to come in and sing this. So it was found in the nation of Israel. Letter B, it was in the early church. And then last of all, it's been all throughout the history of the church. This morning I heard the song that was called the love song of the Welsh revival, a song called Here Is Love. Here is love vast as the ocean. And it's a beautiful song. And it was called the Welsh love song of the revival. You know, God's people all throughout Christian history have had a song. And so my question is do you? So number one, you see the history of congregational singing. But now let's talk about a little bit of the practical things before we dive into into some things about our congregational singing. The elements, number two, the elements of congregational singing. While we're having a congregational service now, I want us to look around and see who all's in the room and who all's doing what. Okay? Because there's several things that work together if you're going to have congregational singing. Okay? So, this one here, I'll just give it to you, the whole shebang. Now, I know how some of you are. You just go ahead and write down all the notes here, all right? So I'm just going to let you do it, and then I'll go back and kill it. The audience in the congregation, that's the first one. And I'll talk a little bit about men and women, skilled and unskilled. The accompanist. Now that accompanist is a really fancy word. accompanist. That's whoever plays the piano, the guitar, the organ, the kazoo, the jaw harp, the jug. I realize we're getting closer to the mountains here, all right? So, but the accompanist, all right? And then you got the song leader. And I want to talk about that in a moment, because I don't know who does what around here, and there's probably some of you that could do it that just won't, and I want to plead with you a little bit. And then the songs themselves, all right? That's letter D, the songs themselves. Let me go back and give it to you. The audience in the congregation, we're going to talk about that. The accompanist, or put pianist if it's too long a word. The song leader and the songs themselves. These are all different elements of congregational singing. And I want to take you through them one by one. Now, first of all, let's talk about the audience, okay? The audience is you, okay? And in that audience, you've got men, you've got women, you've got people who are skilled, you have people that are unskilled. Now, let me ask this question. How many of you tonight here, you have sung a special, now, I'm not talking about just necessarily solo, but you've maybe been in a group. Not the choir. Let's not talk about the choir. If there's a choir that's like, I want to just whittle it down. If you've sung in either like as an individual or a small group, raise your hand. Wow, okay, that's great. You put them down. All right, now let's count the choir too. Small groups, solos, and choir. Oh, wow, that's great. Let's have choir practice after church. So listen, for all of you in here, man, this is a great core. The singing that you've had tonight here as an audience, granted you don't have maybe the low ceiling and other, you got a lot more padding and stuff that absorbs in an auditorium, but listen, you've got a great core. You got some people skilled, they're unskilled, but it doesn't matter. Men, women, you need all of that to have a full congregational singing. So all of you in here, you're part of a congregation. And you're really like the biggest chunk. I mean, listen, we've proven tonight you can sing without an accompanist. Now, that doesn't mean we don't want accompanist. we like piano players. And let me just tell you, if you're a singer, be nice to the piano player, because you're at her mercy. You don't get smart. You say, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. That's just like when you go to a fast food restaurant. Don't go mouthing off at the people that make your food. Don't do that. You're like, well, I'm going to give them a piece of my mind, and they're going to give you stuff you don't want to eat, but you just didn't know it. But here you have the audience, all right? Listen, it's group participation. I don't care who you are in this room. You can sing in congregational singing. Okay? Now let's talk about the accompanist. Now there's a beautiful thing here. Usually we think about the pianist, but some churches have guitar players. Some churches have, I've seen people play different instruments, sometimes a brass instrument or play a violin or a fiddle, So one guy said, what's the difference between a violin and a fiddle? He said, talent. I was like, I don't know about that. That's a little offensive to some of us mountain people. But if you're in here and you play an instrument, you know what? You can play an instrument decent, okay? You don't need like a first lesson clarinet player. That's not what you need to hear. But you know what? If you can play an instrument, I would encourage you to do it with the pianist and everybody during the congregational music. I watched a group of kids. They went off to a ministry camp we have at Ambassador, and they played a bunch of instruments. And we were all playing during a service while everybody was singing, and they went back to their home church. And I saw them all sitting on that front row. Man, they were tooting and bowing and everything else. But I'm going to tell you, it just gave such a fullness to the church. Now, some of you are like, well, we don't have a lot of musicians like that in the church. All right, that's no problem. But you know what? You can think about that and develop it. There's some of you here, you have little kids and they're taking piano lessons. A great way you can start a service is let them prelude 5 minutes before playing their little piece on a Sunday night or a Wednesday night. Or you get a little kid who's learning something, let them play the office. You're just like, it ain't the best. Well, that's all right. They got to start somewhere. They can do that in honor of the Lord. And you can foster that. Musicality in churches right now is really hurting. And so for those of you that have got children, the other day I was at a church in Rhode Island preaching, and the pastor's daughter, she's 4 years old, and she's banging on the piano. She's like, I told Pastor, I said, you know how to stop that, don't you? And he said, how? I said, just let her start taking lessons. She won't want to touch it after that, You don't take lessons, I don't want to do that anymore. But if you're an accompanist, listen to the leader and keep the song in mind when you play. Boy, the other day, it was a funeral, and this pianist, he's as blind as a bat. His name is Dale. I love him because he's got such a sense of humor. He'll joke, say, I was hoping to be an umpire and things like that. I'm like, Dale, you're a nut. But you know what? That boy was playing I Come to the Garden Alone. And he walks with me and he talks with me. But the woman was singing while he was playing. And he played that, and it was the part of the verse where the woman was singing, when the birds hush their singing. And that old boy, it sounded like birds were singing, and as soon as she said that, he stopped. It sent chills up my spine. You know why? Because here he was playing, but the words of the song were in his heart. So for those of you that accompany, you try to do that. I know sometimes it's like, I don't know this song, I'm just hanging on for dear life. But, when you get, it's a group thing. The congregation ought to sing with heart. You ought to play with heart. And then the song leader. Now, guys, let me tell you something. Pastor, are you the song leader? Okay, just the choir. All right. I'm going to give a challenge to every one of you men in this room. Some of you think in order to be a song leader, you have to know 4/4 time, 3/4 time, and have perfect pitch. That is a lie of the devil. I'm going to tell you what, if you can operate a pump handle, and you can be enthusiastic, that's a pretty good start right there. I'm just telling you, you're like, well, I ain't learned. Well, you're not stupid either. You can do it. There may be a guy, listen, you may not have the greatest, but you can stand up and you can welcome people and say, listen, we're glad to have you at Hope Baptist Tabernacle tonight, and we're going to sing, My Jesus, I Love Thee. And you get up there and you're like, My Jesus, I love. How hard's that? That's just like when your mamaw had that switch just wearing on you. You can do that. But guys, listen, when it comes to a song leader, if you'll just be enthusiastic and have a little bit of confidence, that goes a long ways. You don't have to be perfection. Just have a song in your heart and get up before people and lead it. And then the songs themselves, that's important. Did you know there's different types of songs? There's hymns. You know, we sing an old hymn. You're like, boy, that old hymn's just rich. That old hymn is like apple pie. Man, I'm going to tell you, it's lasted through the generations. I get tired. Some people are like, oh, that's just old-fashioned. I'm like, that's funny. You don't mind old-fashioned apple pie and old-fashioned hymn, funnel cakes and old-fashioned Mamaw's fudge. That's pretty good. That's what hymns are like, you know. Boy, they just endured. And then you got songs of testimony. No one's ever cared for me like Jesus. You know, or does Jesus care? Does Jesus care when my heart is pained too deeply? Does Jesus care when I've said goodbye to the dearest on earth to me? You hear the experiences coming out of that? Different types of songs. And then gospel songs. Then you have different themes. You got the cross. Here soon you got Christmas. The blood of Christ. Christ, praise, resurrection, missions. I mean, there's all kinds of different themes. It's like that hymnal that you have over there, even though some of you are like, I've never seen that hymnal that much except in our church. Let me tell you something. That hymnal is filled. It's filled with an assortment of stuff. You know, it won't be monotonous. You know what it's like to eat? We used to eat fried chicken every Sunday, and my dad hated that. You know, he's like, Gene, is that all you can cook? Listen, when you reach into a hymnal, there's all kinds of stuff in there. Use it all. Use it all right? So those are the elements of congregational singing. Now let's talk about the practice of congregational singing. What should I do? What should I do in congregational singing? Okay. Number 3, the practice of congregational singing. Now, I want to show you several verses so that I can draw from these in these next few points. Ephesians 5:18, the Bible says, and be not drunk with wine wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. In verse 19, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Now, I want you to remember those two verses. I'm going to draw back from it here in a minute. Another passage that I would tell you is Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom. Here it is. Teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Now, if I had to just stop and say, what's the most important part of the night, it'd be these verses that I've just shown you. But tonight I want to take some principles from these verses that I hope will help you in your singing, all right? And I may go back to those. Let's talk about the practice of congregational singing. First thing I want you to see, letter A, is that God has given every believer a song. God has given every believer a song. I want to read for you tonight Psalm 40 and verse number 3. And actually, I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. Okay? Some of you are like, that's in the Old Testament. It don't count. Yes, it does. Just listen. Psalm 40 and verse number 1, the Bible says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined unto me and heard my cry. He brought me up out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings, and He hath put a new song in my mouth. I don't care how long you've been saved. I don't care what you were saved out of. If you're here and you're saved, listen to me. God has given you a song. You're like, I never sang a special in church. I don't care. Is God wrong or are you wrong? God gave every one of you a song. That's why I think every one of us can participate in congregational singing. Another thing is this, and it's drawn from Ephesians 5:19. is that a Spirit-filled Christian is a singing Christian. You remember what Ephesians 5:18 said? It said, "Be not drunk with wine where is excess, but be filled with the Spirit." And in the very next verse, in verse number 19, the Bible tells us about our music. It tells us that we ought to be singing. Listen to what it says. It says in verse 19, "Speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord." Let me ask you, have you ever made melody in your heart to the Lord? It humors me. I've heard people who could hardly sing just walk around humming. And the only reason I could recognize what they were humming, it wasn't because I could recognize the pitches. It's just like, okay, I know what he's trying to hum. It doesn't sound like it, but I know what he's trying to do. You know what that is? That's a song in the heart. And I'm going to tell you, I'd much rather have a song in my heart than to have the most professional voice and be empty. So every believer has a song. A Spirit-filled Christian is a singing Christian. It's just assumed. Be filled with the Spirit and then singing. You're like, I don't do singing. Well, you're going to have to take it up with verse 19. If you're not singing in your heart, you're not going to sing in the pew, that's for sure. Another thing is that a unified congregation will have one voice. Corey was talking about community. Well, I'll tell you, music, congregational singing, that's a pretty good gauge of community, what's happening in a church. You know, when people, and you know, it's really interesting. You tell a lot about a congregation sometimes by congregational singing and in different ways. A lot of times it's a gauge. For instance, when you have a dear saint die in the church on Saturday, and the whole church comes in on Sunday and they're just a half step behind. That's okay. That's a community that's just mourning. And hopefully the song leader, won't say, let's get up and sing Jesus. That's probably just a good day let's just take in the moment, And then there's other times where there's great excitement and the pastor comes like, what in the world got into y'all? Y'all are singing the walls off tonight, But sometimes there's factors that affect us, and sometimes you just see the congregation, they rise up, other times they're pressed down. But the congregation, ought to sing with one voice. That doesn't mean you're all going to sing the melody, although that's just fine, or try to find the melody, but some of you are going to sing different parts and such. But another thing is this, congregational singing teaches and encourages. When I was at Turner's Creek, I was in the old boys class with Jim Prophet and S.D. Parker. And let me tell you, Jim Prophet, he was a Vietnam War vet, and there was one reason Jim was in that class teaching us. I've learned it now in hindsight. Because Jim was the threat to us. SD's up there teaching us, and we'd be misbehaving, and Jim would just stand up and say, listen, when I got to Vietnam, I could kill a person 10 ways, and I can teach you how to do it right now if you want. And we were like, yes, sir, and then we stopped. But you know what those men were doing in Sunday school? Those men were teaching us. They were teaching us from the Bible. Did you know that music, singing in a congregational setting teaches? When you're singing about, like, up from the grave he arose, you know what you're doing? You're teaching the resurrection. Every one of you is a teacher. You didn't know that, did you? But music, I'm going to tell you, it's important what we sing in our churches, because you show me what you sing and I'll show you what you believe. And then it admonishes. It encourages us. You ever been in a service? Not every service is going to be this way. I wish every service was cut a watermelon, but it's not. It's like sometimes when I read the Bible, it's like a shout, and other times like a whisper, But have you ever been in a service where, my sin, oh the bliss of this glorious thought, my sin not in part but the whole is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more, and you leave encouraged? As Preacher Barker used to say, just hold my mule while I shout a while. Or maybe you're singing something and you've just been moved to a point where you just can't go any further. You know, it teaches us and it affects us. It admonishes us. It encourages us. That's congregational singing, that we walk in mamby-pamby and we're like, I tell you, it teaches us. It encourages us. And you know what? Here it is. Congregational singing is about the heart. Singing and making melody in your heart. To who? The Lord. That's where it's at. You know, I've heard people who, man, they may not have been the best vocally, but boy, I'll tell you, their hearts were in tune, and that's what mattered. Now, I realize that ain't the person you're going to get to sing a solo in church or whatever. But you know what? This is what I'm going to say. There's some of you in this room, but before tonight, you really haven't put your feet to the fire in congregational singing because you lacked confidence, or you just thought that's something that God sprinkled pixie dust on certain people to do. And I'm here to try to tell you that if you have a heart that loves the Lord and you're saved by the grace of God, God has given you a song, do it. That's where it's at. That's about as blunt as I can be. All right, so here's the last thing I want to share with you, tips for congregational singing. Now these things will help your congregational singing. Okay? Tips for congregational singing. These are things that's going to help your singing, and I'm going to try to help you to see some of it as we sort of close shop up here, all right? So, here's one thing you can do. Think about the words when you sing something. Marvelous grace of our loving Lord. Listen to this. Grace that exceeds our sin and our guilt. Man, I'm going to tell you, that's pretty good. It goes beyond all the worst things that I've done. That's whatever how far my sin went, God's grace outran it. Think about the words. You know, I'll be honest, for me, you know, one of the hardest nights of the week for me is Wednesday nights. What few times I'm in my home church on Wednesdays. That's Wednesdays, like when everything goes wrong and you've stepped on the dog and ran over the neighbor's cat. And you go to church and you're just like, okay, bless me, God. Isn't that real living where some of us are at? I mean, let's be honest. But I'm going to tell you, a Wednesday night service sometimes just like an oasis. Nobody's going to step on me and kill me, and I'm just going to sit back and sing. Think about the words. That's a good thing to do. Another thing is learn how to read a part. Now, I'm going to show you guys something you're not going to believe. You know where people are like, how did you learn to sing? I'll tell you how I learned to sing in congregation. I listened to people who could sing, and they hid my errors when I hit the wrong notes. But you know, you can sort of. I'm not. It's not for everybody. I don't go if you go on Sunday morning and Brother Chris is like, man, that congregational singing was awful. Everybody was off key. It's like not everybody's trying to sing a part. But you know, that's one of the places that you learn. I'm going to show you something, guys. I don't care what you think your musical ability is. All right. I just want you to match a pitch with me. And do what I do, all right? And you're like, I'm scared to death. Quit it. Stop it. Y'all play with fireworks and do stupid stuff, and then you won't do, you know, but we're just, Behold He Comes is all we're going to sing, and it's just all one note, all right? But I just want to show you something, what can happen in a congregation, all right? So, guys, we'll be like, Behold He comes. That's all you're going to do. That's just monotone, all right? Try it. And just all the men, Behold He comes. Just match my pitch. All right, here we go. Behold He comes. All right, now, guys, I'm going to have you do that. And then I want, ladies, if you think you can sing alto, they're going to be on Behold He comes. And you're going to be like on Behold He comes. And guys, you just hold your note. Forget about what they're doing. Ignore them. You just stay on, and they're going to be like, Behold He comes. They're just going to hold it. Just, all right? So trust me, fellas, on this. If you just don't veer to the left or right, it's going to be just fine. All right, here we go. Behold, He comes, behold, He comes. Okay, stop. Yes, some of you unskilled, ignorant, by your own description, not mine. The truth is, I could stack that all the way out, and by the end of this, every one of you, you'd be like, "That's the first choir I've ever sung in." You know how I learned that stuff? Just playing around, looking at a hymnal and listening and figuring it out in congregational singing. Here's another one. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. It ain't like having your gallbladder removed. People are like, "Oh, they do it laparoscopically." I don't care whether they put 4 dots in me or gut me like a deer. I don't want it. I don't want it. Listen, guys, why don't you, when you show up for church, why don't you enjoy it for once? And then here's another little practical thing, and I'm done. Keep a hymnal in your home. If keep a hymnal in your home. A preacher years ago said, if you have a good Bible and you have a good hymnal, that goes a long ways, and he's right. And it's good to have. If nothing else, fellas, sit down and read some of the words. You'll be amazed. You get a good hymnal and you read some of those things that it's teaching and the encouragement that you get and get familiar with it. But I'll tell you what, these 4 things, along with many more, will help you in your congregational singing. Here's the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to pray and ask the Lord to help us perform this on Sunday morning. Listen, your church may not have the most gifted musicians, but I'm going to tell you, if it is filled with believers who have a new song in their hearts, then you can sing as a congregation unto the Lord. And it'll bring honor and glory to Him. So I pray that as you finish 2024, that there's a spring in your step, and when it comes to this congregational singing, that every one of you give it your all, because they've been doing it ever since the beginning of Israel. Let's bow together in prayer. Father, thank you for these men and women, and Lord, thank you for the fun that we can have as we talk about a subject that, Lord, many times is overlooked. I pray that you'd help all of us to see that new song you've put in our hearts, and Lord, help us to sing it without fear, and Lord, with a desire to honor and glorify you. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.